Chinese President Xi Jinping begins his state visit to France on May 6th. In January 2024, France and the People's Republic of China marked 60 years of diplomatic ties. Under President Emmanuel Macron, Paris has sought to project itself as a reliable and trusted international partner. It has worked to forge cordial relationships with the rest of the world, including Beijing. In 2023, Macron met Xi to discuss possible solutions to Russia's war in Ukraine.
Vous l'avez dit, la France est convaincue dans ces temps troublés que nous traversons de l'importance d'abord de la stratégie chinoise et de la réussite de votre pays.
中法作为联合国安理会常任理事国和具有独立自主传统的大国，作为世界多极化、国际关系民主化的坚定推动者，有能力、有责任超越分歧和束缚，坚持稳定、互惠、开拓、向上的中法全面战略伙伴关系大方向。
Historically, France has tried to pursue an independent foreign policy. Former French President Charles de Gaulle wanted his country to be a leading diplomatic power and not just follow Washington's directives.
Elle doit avoir dans le monde, quel qu'il soit, à toute époque, naturellement d'après les circonstances, elle doit avoir un rôle à elle. Il faut que la France joue son rôle, c'est exact. Et pour qu'elle joue son rôle, il faut qu'elle soit la France.
In 1964, France established diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China 15 years before the US. That independence led to decades of cultural and economic exchanges between Paris and Beijing, even when ties between China and the US were rocky.
There's hundreds of exhibitions and sort of people-to-people exchanges and sporting events and so on. So that's been quite prominent, and the French and the Chinese sides are both quite keen to promote those.
In 2012, China leased 2 pandas to France as part of Beijing's panda diplomacy, a testament of good relations between the countries. At other times, France has not hesitated to oppose China, which caused brief strains in bilateral ties. In 1989, following the Tiananmen Square crackdown, France hosted dozens of Chinese dissidents and supported an arms embargo against China. In April 2008, the passage of the Beijing Olympic torch in Paris was disrupted by protesters calling for the independence of Tibet. In the same year, then President Nicolas Sarkozy met the Dalai Lama, prompting strong backlash in China. More recently, France has condemned alleged Chinese human rights abuses in Hong Kong and the Uyghur minority in Xinjiang. Macron even met a Tibetan leader in exile on May 1, 2024, less than a week before his planned meeting with Xi. And despite moves to deepen economic ties, the French leadership has grown more cautious in engaging with China. China is France's 5th largest trading partner. However, France imports more than it exports to China, with Beijing racking up a trade surplus of 39.6 billion euros in 2022.
On the economic side, of course, France and Macron wants French companies to do well in China. He always is making the case that European companies have less access in China than Chinese companies have in Europe. So this is something that they're always trying to sort of pursue. But I think on that front as well, there's a sense of realism that has been baked into the relationship in recent years. I mean, France is quite supportive of the de-risking agenda. For example, as I said, it instigated the electric vehicle probe. It was quite open to probing subsidies in the Chinese solar sector.
Despite some politically sensitive areas, Beijing views its relationship with Paris as increasingly important, especially in the context of its rivalry with Washington.
It is one of the architects and one of the biggest proponents of a strategic autonomy, which is like a strong Europe. It may sort of Macron and his sort of his commissioner Thierry Breton in Brussels. They are always espousing this desire for Europe to be the third pole in a multipolar world. And I think China likes to promote this idea because it sees this as a sort of wedge between Europe and the United States, which indeed it could be perceived to be that way. But the other side of the coin is that this quest and desire for a strong Europe means that Macron is one of the biggest sponsors of some of the biggest irritants of the EU-China relationship.
France is influential in European politics. It is a nuclear power, a global military power, a permanent UN Security Council member, the 7th biggest economy in the world, and the 2nd in the European Union. It also is one of 2 informal leading countries in the EU and holds sway in multiple Francophone countries. At the same time, Paris is trying to assert itself as a more proactive global leader while also promoting Europe's strategic autonomy on the world stage and sees France as an initiative-seeking and balancing power.
Nous aimons choisir nos amis. Nous les respectons dans la durée. Nous sommes là quand ils ont besoin de nous et nous respectons leur indépendance. Et dans un monde où les grandes puissances voudraient redevenir hégémoniques et où les puissances régionales deviennent imprévisibles, je crois qu'il est bon d'avoir des amis qui ont cette philosophie.
France's willingness to break with its allies from time to time could work in China's favor, but ultimately it looks after its own interests.
Despite pursuing what is considered to be a positive strategic autonomy for Europe in terms of how China sees things, this is also why Macron is one of the biggest supporters of these sorts of behavior, because he sees this as building a strong Europe. So that works both ways, I would say. It's not just a sort of a pro-China, anti-America, anti-China, pro-America. It's Macron wants a strong France and a strong Europe, and that can lead to at times what some people think are confusing and contradictory approaches to geopolitics.
And France's stance towards China is complicated by its deep ties with the US. France remains an integral part of the US-led military alliance NATO, of which China is not a member. French warships regularly join US patrols in the South China Sea, a large part of which is claimed by China but contested by its neighbors. France is a sovereign power in the Indo-Pacific, and like the US, says it wants to promote stability in the region. However, China has repeatedly warned foreign nations not to meddle in what it calls internal affairs. At the same time, Macron has pushed for China to condemn Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China, however, has so far not done so.
China's relationship with Russia, everywhere you go in Europe, apart from very few exceptions, they will tell you this is a problem. More and more, there is the sense in Europe that China has not just rhetorically backed Russia's invasion of Ukraine, or at least not condemned it, but they do see an increasing in terms of shipping dual-use goods that can be used by the Russian military. So above anything else, that sort of overhangs the European relationship with China, and I think in France that's no exception.
During Xi's state visit, Russia's war in Ukraine is expected to be high on the agenda. Since their last meeting in 2023, Macron has put increasing pressure on Xi to condemn Russia's actions in Ukraine.
Évidemment, la Chine joue un rôle clé dans l'indépendance, le respect du droit international, y compris la souveraineté de l'Ukraine. Et donc, nous attendons évidemment de la Chine qu'elle passe des messages très clairs à la Russie.
The outcome of the state visit could determine the trajectory of Sino-French relations in the coming years. Despite their differences, China and France remain linked, and Macron hopes to attract Chinese investments to boost his country's economy.
The economy's not doing very well. The far right is rising. If he could get some big ticket investment in factories in the north of France, gigafactories and battery plants and so on, I think he'd be very, very happy. So if that was one of the outcomes of Xi Jinping's visit to France, Macron will be, I think he would be hoping he'd enjoy a bump in the polls on the back of that.
Polls show 76% of the French population are not satisfied with Macron's performance since his 2022 re-election.